This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and lots of different guests. And actually, guests is what today is all about. It's peak sowing, growing and planting time right now. And so we actually thought it would be quite fun to do a kind of resume of lots of 7 of our guests, or my guests, I guess, over the last year, giving their top plant tips, which kind of extends it out for me in a really good way, I think. And so what we've got is a range of the subjects that I cover in the podcast, from veg to flowers and shrubs to roses, you know, everything really. So food to flowers to produce to arranging, the whole thing. And so we are going to kick off with Simon Lycett, and we're going to finish with me and my top picks for sowing and growing now. So Simon Lycett, as I'm sure lots of you will know, is the florist extraordinaire, is what I would call him. He loves incredibly flamboyant, on the whole, massive kind of flower installations, does lots of the great venues of the City of London. And, they're just ebullient, exuberant and exciting. And in this little clip, he's talking about his favourite things for spring, which of course we're in right now, Imperial Fritillaries and Lily of the Valley.
I have to have Lily of the Valley in there.
Oh,
of course,
yes.
They're not going to flower in my garden because the dog keeps weighing on them every time. I try, and I've now got them in a pot that's high, so he can't. I also love all the fritillaries.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the Crown Imperials, that amazing, strange, foxy fragrance that lots of people hate it. I love it.
Yeah.
And they're phototropic, aren't they? They wend around in their vase. They do that thing. And they just evolve into a total joy for me.
Yeah, I love them. And that dewdrop of nectar right at the apex of every single part of their bells. Yeah, they're amazing. I totally agree. They're one of my absolute favourites. Our next guest clip is Jess Gough. And she is a young woman who I met through social media, actually. And she came to visit Perch Hill on one of our influencer days. And I love that she's appealing and teaching younger people than me to grow veg, how to sow, grow, what are the easy things, what are the tasty things. She's got a wonderful Instagram feed, which I really love, her face popping up, called Happy Small Holding. And in this little clip, she's talking about her favourite varieties of peas and potatoes, which they're a call to action, or she gives us a call to action, because, of course, now is a very good planting time. So over to Jess. What are your absolute stalwarts that you've got out there growing now, and what varieties of them?
So at the moment, we've got peas out there. We're a bit boring and we grow Hearst green shaft, which I think is quite a bog standard, but it is really tasty. And then we're trying a few heritage varieties this year. So Glory of Devon and one that's just called green shaft. Glory of Devon's quite cool, actually. It's huge. I don't know if you've grown it before, but it's grown really tall. It looks impressive. It's a good sort of 2.5 meters tall.
Well, the good thing about tall varieties of peas is that there was one that was famously found, some seeds were found in Tutankhamun's tomb. And the archaeologist, whose name escapes me momentarily, anyway, he distributed seed. That he grew it out in his own garden and distributed seed around the stately homes of England. And Chatsworth still grow this Tutankhamun seed, and that is really tall. And the brilliant thing about it, you've got to stake it fantastically well, but the brilliant thing about it is that it means it goes on growing, flowering and cropping for almost twice as long as any other variety, because it's so tall. So it's just growing, on and on it goes, rather than reaching a certain height, stopping and cropping heavily. So they're really useful for the domestic grower, these very tall varieties. But people are scared of them because they think, I'm going to have to pick from a stepladder. But you don't, but they just do give you a much longer harvesting season.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So yeah, you get a lot more crop for your space, don't you? Because you're not taking up any more space on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, sorry, you were talking about potatoes when I interrupted.
Yeah, potatoes this time of year is so exciting. I love digging up potatoes. It's like panning for gold, but we grow one particular variety called Red Duke of York, which is just beautiful because it's so red and it's really early as well. So we've harvested a few of those already, but they'll go on for another few weeks.
Brilliant. Our next guest is Jemima Bowker, who's one of our Sarah Raven team, and she's been with me for quite, many years now, worked with me at Perch, and now works in the Marlborough team, and she's sort of our balcony and beginner gardener expert. And in this clip, she is picking seeds that are easy for beginners to sow now. So over to Jemima.
So I have a bit of a list here, which I'm excited to go through with you. I guess one thing worth bearing in mind is that although I've spent loads of time in different gardens and a lot of time in the garden at Perch Hill, one area that I don't think I've spent as much time or put as much focus in is the propagation side. So I'm excited to chat through the actual seed sowing methods as well, because I think that is something where I definitely could have more knowledge on. So my number one is calendula. They are everywhere at Perch Hill. We use them for all the salads. They're vibrant and colourful and edible, and notoriously are very easy to grow and quick to germinate. I love the touch of red mix because I love all the ones that have that amazing kind of crimson reverse. I just think it's a really nice contrast, and I prefer them to the kind of just pure orange or yellow ones. So I love that they're edible. I think you could grow them in pots, or they can be on edges of borders. So for both beginners and small space urban gardeners alike, I think they are pretty easygoing and low maintenance. Right, next is Zinnia elegans Queenie Lime Red. I just think is that the first year I was at Perch Hill, I wasn't that wild about them. And then last summer, I just absolutely love them. I love how they are, when they first are coming out, they're kind of pale kind of lime acid green. And then they kind of gradually get bigger and bigger and turn into this kind of big, dusky, red, antique-y, amazing flower. And they have such an amazing vase life as well. So I really love zinnias now. I think I'd have them if I had a small little bed, in a nice little corner. I'd have them planted with lots of other things, because I do find that on their own, they're quite a stiff plant. So I think they need nice soft things around them to kind of soften them up. But I think they are beautiful. And next up, and I am going to probably pronounce this wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but Schizanthus wisiturnensis, Dr. Badger's hybrid mix is a bit of a mouthful. But we had them in pots at Perch Hill in kind of early summer. So I think they were sown in autumn. And they are quite tall and elegant, and they've got this kind of ferny foliage with kind of butterfly-ish delicate flowers in pale purple to that kind of honesty purple colour. And I just love them when there wasn't a huge amount else going on. I thought they were amazing. And when we were about to cut them back after they'd kind of gone over, we kept them and we used them in flower arrangements in the shop at Perch Hill. And they lasted in the vase for like 2.5 weeks, I think, or maybe even longer. So they were amazing. But I've only ever seen them growing in pots. I mean, would you grow them in the ground?
You can. They've got very delicate stems. I mean, I could call them flimsy, but that's a bit derogatory. So if we grow them outside, we always grow them up through a nest of like hazel or birch sticks, because they really are very fragile. So I totally adore them, and I would stake them also in a pot. So, but they, wind is not their friend, if you see what I mean. So that's why, in a way, in a pot, in a very sheltered spot, or even in a greenhouse or on a window ledge in a house, they are perfect. But they're not tender. They're just not robust in the stem.
And the bees love them as well. I think they're so beautiful.
Thanks, Mimes. That was really good little taster. And now over to Charlie Harpur. Now, Charlie Harpur is a very impressive guy. He is head gardener at Knepp, which I'm sure lots of you will know, is a very famous rewilding project in Sussex, about an hour and a quarter from us at Perch. And I absolutely love going there. I've been going there for years, actually, to see nature returning over the whole estate. But now Charlie is kind of guiding the wall garden into an incredibly biodiverse, rewilded situation, which is very exciting, doing lots of trialing, testing, experimenting, recording. And in this clip, he tells us another thing that's really one of my passions, which is looking after pollinators. And so he tells us which are the plants that he thinks are perfect for a succession in the garden for pollinators from early to late. Would you have 3 to 5 plants that you would feel that we should all consider growing that perhaps we're not, so not a buddleia, which we all kind of know about, but perhaps 3 or 4 more unusual things?
So I suppose if rather than sort of listing some plants that I would grow, because it sort of, really does change on, it depends a lot on context, is to think about succession through the year. So especially at this time of year, having, and we haven't talked about native species and non-native species in great depth at the moment, but it's good to have a mix to cater for, specific insects associations, for example, but also to create a resilient garden. So if I was thinking about the early season, currently in the garden we've got lots of primula. We've got cowslips, for example, out at the moment, and they seed themselves around really well, and provide an early season nectar source. And then going through, I guess we've got a lot of things like dianthus, a couple of dianthus species which they're not uncommon now in a garden setting, but they do really well. They seed themselves around, and it's the hummingbird hawk moss that we see a lot on those. And then going forward, we've got things like Achillea species, which are just are really good doers and a big sort of dinner plate of a daisy. And then grasses are very important as well. And actually, we quite a lot of the really beneficial grasses for our native insects are sort of native meadow grasses, and we allow those to sort of seed themselves around in the garden, but they also, more ornamental grasses provide good cover for a range of wildlife right through the season into one particular star plant which does really well on our really free draining substrate, which is actually, it's a mix of 75% crushed concrete, 25% sand, so really harsh. We've got things like Bouquet purpurea, which is a really sort of thistly daisy from South Africa, which sort of seems to flower right the way through the year. So yeah, I would say, to round up, I'd say think about that season. Try and pack in the opportunity throughout the year and get that mix of native species and non-native species.
Now we're going to go to another of our SR home team, Gary Newell, who you've heard quite a lot on the podcast. He's such a plant expert, particularly with a sort of sustainability angle. And I've learned so much from Gary. And of course, one of the really sustainable things in our gardens are our shrubs. Why? Well, they're very low maintenance on the whole, so they're good for people who are busy, but also they give really fantastic habitat and forage for lots and lots of animals, large and small. I mean, obviously, we don't want many of the large, but for birds, they give shelter and food. For pollinators, the same. They give a hideout hole, safe from things wanting to come and eat you, like sparrowhawks if you're a little bird. And Gary is going to talk about his absolutely favourite shrub for this time of year, which is a Kinomeles, a quince. And this is one that is really ornamental, but also fruits. So over to Gary to hear about that. So one of the Kinomeles I know you particularly like. And if it isn't jumping you into it, without any warning, will you describe your favourite Kinomeles?
It's Crimson and Gold is the one that I prefer. I think I've mentioned it before in one of our podcasts. Yeah. So you get the scarlet flowers on there, but you also still get the Japanese quince produced on it as well.
Yes.
It's a speciosa species, so you do still get the fruit, and it's usable fruit as well to make jams with. But especially nice because it's some of the new hybrids are not quite as strong growers. I guess they've been growing for certain colours, but this one it's It's an original variety and it's very strong.
So second from last is Kim Murray, Andy Murray's wife, the wonderful tennis player. And now Kim has taken to gardening big time. And that's how I've got to know her. And she absolutely loves tulips, she loves roses, she loves sweet peas. She loves the really beautiful classic garden favourites, things like Nepeta and Alchemillus underneath roses and sweet peas. So it's really, really nice to chat to her. And there's a little clip from her episode here. So I'd love to know various kind of, in a way, obvious questions, but do you have a favourite plant?
Oh, gosh. Well, I've mentioned sweet peas because the smell, I can't. Yeah, again, it's instant. It's evocative. It's really nostalgic, actually. It reminds me of my granny. So sweet peas, I love that every year. Some years I have better years than others, but I always do take great pride in my sweet peas. You know, roses are just obviously I love, can't have too many, in my opinion. But then I think things that probably since we planted up the garden now that I've got a real appreciation for that I probably wasn't aware of before are things like Alchemillus and Nepeta and just, you know, gorgeous things that I would use as almost fillers in arranging, but they tumble over your borders and your edges and kind of line your pathways and things in a really like romantic wafty way. And I love Alchemillus because it'll go everywhere and you've got not much control over where it turns up, but it's quite fun to see where it decides to make home.
And finally, over to the celebrity hairdresser, Sam McKnight. And I'm so somebody not well versed in fashion. And, you know, slightly embarrassingly didn't know some of the fashion designers he was referring to that he cuts the hair of. But anyway, he's an absolutely charming man. And he has the most beautiful city, London garden, a real oasis, full of beautiful roses, sweet peas, and lots of our dahlias. And his tips are really good for just making a beautiful back London garden. So it's great to end our guests with him.
I know you love roses, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I think you love dahlias. But so maybe can you give us your 5 favourite flowery flowers?
I'd have to say number 1 would have to be a competition between roses and dahlias. I mean, roses, I just love my garden is full of roses. I'm probably keeping David Austin and Peter Bills in business because I get a few new ones every year. I've got far too many. I can't buy any more. And then I do. And the whole garden is surrounded by climbing roses and up the back of the house and up the front of the house too. Love that. Also, favorite type. Oh God, so many. My favorite of all is Munstead wood. It is incredible, but they're not that great anymore. I bought some new ones and they didn't do so well. So I treasure the 2 really good ones that I have and long for it to come back. Love that. I love my generous gardener too. I love that. And I love Gloire de Dijon. I love Lady of Shalott. I mean, there are so many. There's so many. And I love dahlias equally. I love the length of the season of dahlias. And my favorite dahlias are the big dinner plate ones. I love all the Café au lait, the Café au lait royal, all those. Love all those. And I love the really gaudy cactus ones, the labyrinth ones. I mean, I love the blousiness. And I think what Joe taught me was I could have some color almost every month of the year. Mm-hmm. So we start with the crocuses and the primroses in early, and then we go into daffodils, then tulips, then the roses come with the perennials, and I've got lots of hardy geraniums, lots of those. Oh, yeah. Roseanne does really well in my garden, and I've got lots of pink ones. So I still don't know what everything is called, but I love lupins. But recently, my lupins just get eaten. I'm going to try really hard this year with the lupins, but they just seem to just not last in my garden. You know, I love all the clematis too that starts, and then we go on to when the roses are gone. There's a little gap, isn't there? There's a little bit of a gap, and I haven't really figured that out yet. That's something I have to.
So, like some half-hardy annuals. Or also, what about some alliums, some later alliums? You know, some of the ones that Do you like alliums or not so
I
much?
love alliums. Yeah, I just bought a whole load of alliums. So are there some that come later then?
Yeah, well, I mean, a nice late one actually is Christophii.
I love that. Yeah, love that one.
Yeah, that's a bit later. And then the latest of all is that tiny little one called Sphaerocephalum, which means round head.
Oh,
And
God,
that's really new.
I'm going to check that out. Yeah, yeah.
And then finally, with me, I teach a lot, as you know. And as I teach and have been teaching a lot over the last couple of months, I go through my slides and think about what I'm going to talk about. And it's really interesting what sort of rouses my passion. When I see a picture coming up, I think, oh, yes, I really couldn't live in a garden, however small, or even with a balcony without lots of these things. Now, I'm lucky I garden over quite a large area, but I would really, really use these, whatever size my garden and wherever it was. So my top 5 that I'm going to just go through quickly. You'll have heard of lots of these in previous podcasts. I've banged on about them probably quite enough. But my number 1 is Cobaea scandens. And Cobaea scandens, the cup and saucer plant, is vigorous, easy, beautiful, very late and long flowering. I can often pick it in December. The cup and saucer plant, it looks like quite a sort of a little teacup, but sizable, sitting on a little saucer, and it comes in purple and white. But I tend to grow the purple more because it's a bit easier. And actually, the buds of the purple anyway are greeny white. So you get a lovely mix of colours on the one vine. It's a climber, it's vigorous. It will either climb to 30 or 40 foot if you want it to, up a house, or you can make it a frame, or it'll trail. And we have it on the green stage, 3 seedlings in a old water trough from the farm, and it cascades down to ground level from the first floor balcony. It's wonderful. Cobaea scandens, probably best, safest to get from seedlings now rather than seeds, because ideally it's one of the things that I would recommend sowing in January and February. But Cobaea scandens, if you don't know it, wherever you live, I would grow it. It is tender. It'll be hardy in a city like in London, but it's tender if you get to -3, -4. It will be killed, but it's easy to grow from seed. And so collect your own seed at the end of this year and sow it again late winter, early spring. Number 2 for me is Petunia Tidal Wave Red Velour. And every year I know it better. I love it more. It is already in flower and has been in flower in the greenhouse since the beginning of March. I mean, unbelievable, with velvet trumpets, and it'll flower outside in the garden well through October. So it really is almost like 8 or 9 month flowering thing. You can grow it from seed. There's still time to sow it. And just remember, if you've got anywhere to store things out of the frost, it's well worth doing that, because you'll get bigger and better plants next year. But also very brilliant to be sown and grown as an annual. We grow it as a container plant. We now use it as a cup flower. I use it on the edge of a terrace so it trails out into our Dutch yard. It's a cracking plant with the most beautiful silken velvet crimson trumpets, an absolute winner. My third is not radical at all. I mean, none of these are really. They are just the things that right now, if I sat down and thought of a list, are my top 5. So the next is honeywort or cerinthe. Now, a honeywort is called that because it's dense with a really carbohydrate-rich nectar, so it's fantastic for pollinators. But also, if you sow it 2 or even 3 times a year, so we tend to sow it in September to flower early in the spring, March and April. We also sow it in February to sort of flower through the summer. And actually, we sow it in early summer, so in June, to flower right the way into the winter. So many, many, many uses. And it's a brilliant foliage plant. If you sear the stem ends in boiling water, lasts beautifully in a vase. It's really elegant on the edge of a path, cascading over. It's a wild flower from the Mediterranean. I've seen it growing wild in both Spain and Greece. And it's easy, and it will self-seed. So if you put it in one year, you'll have it the next year or even the same season. And we've sometimes had grandchildren from an early sowing. in 1 year. So 3 generations in 1 year from one plant going in. So get seedlings or sow seed now. Seedlings will be in flower in a month. And if you sow your own, they'll be in flower in about 10 weeks. So really passionately recommended. My number 4 is a pelargonium, and it's got to be a scented leaf pelargonium. And I tried to think of a sort of radical new one that some of you wouldn't know. But do you know what? I ended up just saying Attar of Roses, which is the one that's grown for the perfume industry in China. And it's absolutely deliciously fragrant, slightly sort of definitely rosy, but also a little bit lemony. And the reason I chose it is we use it so much as a crop here, as an edible flower, but also using the leaves as the flavoring for cordials. And there's a recipe on the website, and we make it as soon as it starts cropping heavily in the summer and through the autumn. We harvest it, like we would any leafy crop. I mean, it's not as quick growing as chard, of course, but it is still an absolute cracker. Beautiful, scented, versatile. Not hardy, of course, but is hardy if you've got a greenhouse. So bring it in, cut it back in spring and it'll reshoot. Not hugely flowery, so some people aren't so keen on it. Small pink flowers, but just the most amazing fragrant foliage. So yeah, passionately recommended. My number 5, I couldn't decide between Swiss chard, obviously an edible because I haven't included them really apart from Attar of Roses, or Rosa mutabilis. And in the end, because I have gone on a lot about Swiss chard and what a fantastically productive and invaluable, in fact, edible crop it is. So I've gone for Rosa mutabilis. I tell you why. I was in Italy staying in the house of a friend in the Marche this autumn, well into November. And this and its brother or cousin, Bengal crimson, was still in flower. So their genes are in the China roses, incredibly healthy, incredibly long flowering, not vigorous at all. So very unlike a sort of chunky David Austin style rose, but this is a species and it's just absolutely beautiful. It's called mutabilis because the flowers open pink and fade to apricot. I think that's the right way around rather than the other way around. Anyway, mutabilis means changing or changeable in Latin. And it's a rose everybody should have in their garden. Weirdly happy in a pot because it's not a vigorous grower and just utterly splendid. Wonderful in the vase, wonderful in the garden, wonderful for pollinators and wonderful for fragrance and very, very healthy. So my top 5, Cobaea, Petunia tidal wave red velour, Cerinthe, Pelargonium Attar of Roses and Rosa mutabilis. So I hope with that resume of some of our loveliest guests and finishing off with me, you've got some galvanizing tips to get you out into the garden, sowing, growing and planting. So happy spring. Thanks so much for listening to Grow Cook Eat Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven. Next week, Adam Nicholson, my husband, is joining me and we're going to talk about Bird School, his new book, which is out next week. And there's just so many things that he talks about that really enthuses me. And I think lots of you will find it really interesting to listen. So see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.